welcome to UK Health Radio, your global feel-good radio. I'm Dora Walsh, and I've been working in the field of natural and functional medicine for over 16 years. I'm a qualified nutritionist and nutritional therapist, and I support my clients to release stubborn weight and overcome chronic health conditions like digestive problems, autoimmune concerns, low immunity, skin problems, chronic fatigue, and more. You can find out more about me on the internet and also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Well, this week, we're going to be talking about changing diets and changing lives. This is a really important topic because so many people are caught in food poverty today, thinking they can't afford to eat properly, thinking that healthy food is inaccessible to them, and consequently spending money on packaged food that's too expensive for them, and then it's really hitting them in the pocket and reducing their amount of money that they have to spend on their bills and their well-being and their life. It's really important that we know how to procure good, healthy food at a good price. And this relates to everyone, not just people that are potentially going into food poverty, but all of us are looking really at the cost of living and also the importance of actually just getting good, healthy food and knowing how to eat in a healthy way, because eating well does change your life. You will have a stronger body, a healthier mind, better sleep, better immunity. And that's really going to set you up for your work and your life and your well-being. I'm speaking this week to founder and CEO of Bags of Taste. She is Alicia Weston. Bags of Taste is a nationwide health inequalities organization working with over 2,000 vulnerable people a year to improve their diet. Welcome to the show, Alicia.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I read about what you were doing. I think somebody mentioned you to me, and then I looked you up on LinkedIn and I saw your website. I was really inspired by your story and what you were doing to help change people's lives, to help change their diet and get that education out there on healthy cooking, etc. We're going to be talking a lot more about that. But before we go on to talk about this amazing organization that you set up called Bags of Taste, tell us how you came to be interested in this topic and then go on to set up your not-for-profit.
Oh, that's a big question. Well, I suppose I should say that way back at university, I studied pharmacology. So I have a medical sciences background. So I've always had an interest in things biological, let's say. But I went off and did quite a lot of other stuff in completely different fields, in the field of finance prior to this. And it all started because, another long story that I won't go into, I used to run one of London's top supper clubs, which I don't know if people are familiar with that, but basically it's kind of like a restaurant in your own home. And I used to give all of the profits from that away to Médecins Sans Frontières, a great charity. And because of that, I would try and cook for as little money as possible. So I became quite well known for cooking amazing 12-course meals for about £5 a head. And because of that, Crisis, who I'd had quite a long relationship with, they're another charity that works on homelessness, asked me if I would teach some of their service users how to cook. And I think they obviously did because they thought that I could teach them to cook on a budget, basically. So I ran 2 courses for them. And the thing that I observed when doing that was that everybody loved the classes. But every week when I asked them if they'd made what they'd learned the week before, they hadn't. And I knew the stuff was really affordable. I knew it was achievable. I tweaked it, trying to improve the situation. But what I noticed was they loved coming to the classes. They loved the food. They didn't want the course to end. There was loads of demand, but it didn't change what they ate at home. And that really bothered me. And to be honest, I just thought there's better things I can do with I'm not doing this for entertainment. I'm doing this to actually try and improve their diet. So I went away and I did other stuff. And I was working at a think tank and listening, not whilst I was at the think tank, but while I was painting something, I was listening to the radio and they were talking about the cost of diabetes to the NHS. And it was just a staggering number. And I thought to myself, gosh, I mean, this is only going to get worse. And it is something, type 2 diabetes is something that's more prevalent amongst poorer people. And I thought, what you need to do is to teach poor people to cook. That's what I thought. And I thought, but I tried that and it didn't work. And so I thought to myself, that's what I do every day as a job nowadays. I actually work on intractable problems and try and find solutions. So I thought, why don't I treat this as if it is a problem that I'm working on at work? And so I did all the stuff that I would normally do. I did focus groups. I really tried to understand what the problem was because I thought I knew what the problem was. I thought it was that people didn't know how to cook. But clearly, if that was the problem I had taught them to cook, it didn't solve. If that was the solution I had taught them and it didn't solve the problem. So So I thought there must be a different thing that we can do. We just need to understand, perhaps my understanding of the problem is wrong. And so I did quite a bit of work on this, and I realized that yes, my understanding of the problem was wrong. And that's where Bags of Taste came from, essentially, was like, once you really understand what the issues are, then you can come up with a solution. But if you get the wrong problem, you will always have the wrong solution.
Not you. So you had to go really deep and use your understanding for your job in solving problems to really know what it is you had to do in order to solve it. And what was the problem? Because initially you thought it was people just not knowing how to cook, but once you taught them to cook, they still weren't doing it. So what did you find from your research?
So one of the first things I did was I started surveying everyone I could find who had ever done a cooking lesson. Now I found that only 8% of recipes taught in cooking lessons are ever cooked again at home. So cooking lessons are perceived as being entertainment, really, more than anything else. It's like, instead of going out for dinner or something, go to a cooking lesson. Right. So I thought, well, that's interesting as well. Yeah. So what I found was that there were a lot of barriers to cooking for people in poverty that middle classes, people like me, had faced. And so you simply didn't think of them, if I'm being honest. I mean, when I look back at what I did in those lessons, I did what we would call traditional home economics. This whole idea of, why don't you buy a whole chicken and you can roast it, and you can make a pie with the leftover meat, and then you can make a stock and make a bones, all of that kind of real thrifty, wartime era home economics, should we call it. And now when I look back at that, it's laughable how naive I was, honestly, about the issues. And I mean, I can't say that my focus groups and what have you led me to a really deep understanding. I think I've got a really deep understanding now after having worked actually personally with about 1,500 people, and our organisation is working with about 2,000 people a year at the moment. But it certainly got me on the way. And the first thing I thought was, well, what if they're not cooking, like, not going back and buying that stuff? What about I just gave them the ingredients and they went back home with a bag of ingredients? Like, wouldn't that be easier for them to do? And so that was kind of the starting point, really. But I mean, now we have a really, really deep understanding of the issues, and they're what is known in the trade now as something called the social determinants of health. So these are the really sort of deep underlying issues, which are mainly societal. So they're quite complex. They're usually interlinked, and they're the societal issues that basically influence our underlying health. And they would be, I've divided them personally into 4 groups. So they're the economic stuff of like what it costs. So that would be things like even how much you think it's going to cost, because perception of healthy eating is that it's going to be more expensive, and there's plenty of research that shows that. If you're in poverty, you've got quite a big risk of waste, right? You buy something, you don't use it all. What are you going to do with the leftovers? Is it going to go off? I mean, any middle class person who cooks frequently will have a larder full of stuff that they've used 2 teaspoons of, tried a recipe, decided they never cook that again, and they've just got the rest of the bottle sitting there, and they throw it out after it's gone off after about 5 years. This isn't really an option if you're in poverty. You can't risk buying something your kids won't eat. It's quite interesting that people in poverty will be more likely to buy branded goods than middle class people. And I think a lot of that is to do with confidence in the quality and that their kids will eat it. They know that they will always eat McCain chips, whereas if they were to buy an own brand, whether that they're shopping at Iceland today or Tesco's tomorrow or whatever, if they were to buy an own brand version, the kids may not like it, may not want to eat it, whether that's chicken nuggets or fish fingers or whatever. So yeah, so there's a lot of issues around that. There's issues around energy costs. Something I don't even think about when I'm cooking is how long do I have to have the oven on for? There's transport costs. If you don't have a car and you've got to actually get all your groceries home from the supermarket and you've got a family to buy for, I mean, it's really heavy. How are you going to get it home? Is it in the near term, it might feel cheaper to actually buy at the local corner store because like you don't have to pay for the transport costs. But of course that's an enormous long-term cost in reality because it's so much more expensive than supermarkets. You've got cost of equipment. Do you have all the right equipment? Does somebody expect you to have a blender to make that soup because you can't afford it? You've got storage. Do you have space? It's all very well to tell people to bulk buy, but have they got space to store all of that stuff? Have they got a freezer? Have they just got an ice box? I mean, these are all things that you really need to think about. Have they even got cash to buy in bulk up front? Because often people don't have that amount of cash to to do a big shop, for example. It's all very well to say Tesco's will deliver, but your minimum order now is £50. So do you have the money to pay up front for that? So it's all of these kind of issues. So there's the economic issues. Then you've got the psychological issues, and people in poverty are much more likely to have poor mental health, their confidence. They're more likely to be socially isolated. So there's this whole thing of, I can't be bothered, just cook for me. There's all of that stuff. They've got less healthy food preferences, mainly because they've not been exposed to healthy food preferences. Or healthy foods. So they just don't really know what it tastes like. So they just go, I don't like it. And again, you've got this perception of cost as well. So often people won't even try something because they think, it's just going to be too expensive. I can't afford that. They've got issues around allocation of time. And there's something, a psychological concept called scarcity mindset, which basically means that when you're struggling with being short of something, in this case, money, you find it very difficult to think of anything else and planning ahead, all of that stuff. I mean, this is one of the things that makes that whole roast chicken joke just laughable, because the whole concept of planning ahead, I could pull apart what I did in the early days and absolutely decimate it. What was wrong with it? That's why it didn't work. And a lot of the people that we work in there are people like myself, well-meaning middle-class people who think they know how to cook cheaply, and surely they could show other people. And actually, there's a lot more to it than that. Then on top of that, you've got structural issues, like you've got a high takeaway density in poor areas. You've got cultural food preference as well, may not be very healthy. You've got food access issues, which I talked about, with just being able to access the shop, or a big shop. And then finally, you've got the practical stuff, which are poor skills, poor results, and information access. And that's what you address in a cooking lesson. So you can see why a cooking lesson doesn't really cut the mustard.
I understand, because obviously when we learned, I don't know if you did home economics at school, but I did. You learn to make all these very elaborate things, and you learn all these skills, but really it's not of no use to the people that you were dealing with. I'm interested to know, after learning all these things that you've shared, how did you then change what you were doing? Because initially you started off with a very clever plan of doing the roast chicken, which we can understand from our perspective, because maybe we're planning ahead and we realize it's cheaper and you can use it for different dishes. So what would you do now?
Well, I mean, first of all, we don't expect much planning ahead. I mean, the first thing that we did was we started to provide all the ingredients, so people could buy the ingredients at the class and take it home. So in the early days, pre-pandemic, we used to do face-to-face classes, and this enabled us to learn a huge amount. So we would actually do the classes. We would make up bags of ingredients for the recipes that we taught in the class. And we would say to people, you can buy this bag of ingredients for £3. Do you want to buy it? And over time, we used to get that up to we'd expect about 2/3 of the people in the class to buy a bag of ingredients. So that gave me a really interesting opportunity, because if people were not buying the bag, then I wanted to know why. Mm-hmm. And that enabled us to really improve what we did. So you'd sit down with them and you say, why aren't you buying a bag? And it's interesting, because most of the people that, if we ask them why they weren't cooking at home, they would say, it's too expensive. I mean, that would probably be the most common response, right? But there were other responses as well. We surveyed the hell out of everybody. I was like one massive giant walking survey, really. And then I would grill them as well, poor things. And, so there was this sort of, it's cost, but then you remove the issue of cost, because you say, well, there's 4 meals in that bag and I'm charging you £3. So it's 75p a portion. It is literally cheaper than chip. Okay. So do I have to buy? So I became like London's largest armourer, basically. I used to buy hundreds of knives and sell them to them at £1 a knife. And, then people started buying 4 knives. And I was like, why are you buying 4 knives? And they're like, well, you're not going to always be around. And when it gets blunt, I'm going to need another one. And I'm like, sharp on it. And it turned out that it wasn't particularly that people didn't have knives. Everyone had knives. What they didn't have was a sharp knife. So then it became knife sharp, measuring spoons. And basically we just found all these there were equipment issues. There was this worry about ovens and how much that would cost. So you don't teach them oven things. There were the kids don't like this dish, or I don't feel confident. There's things like people wouldn't feel confident they might be able to replicate it at home. And then was that a teaching quality issue? Because we started to open lots of different branches, and it was very easy to evaluate the branch quality, because you could compare the answers as to why people weren't cooking. So if they weren't buying bags, then you start to really think about like what's going wrong there. And it might be that that the teaching quality wasn't good enough, so they didn't feel confident. Was it the recipes that were being taught? Was it all manner of things, really? So we learned a huge amount, and we worked with 5,500 people face to face before switching to what we do currently. And I think that really enabled us to understand the skills that people need, the skills they don't need. Bear in mind that people in poverty have exactly the same cooking skills as the rest of the population.
Okay.
The whole idea of, oh yeah, you just need to teach poor people to cook was just the sort of condescending, naive middle class attitude. But
so you had to cook, but basically it sounded like there was a cost issue, there was a perception of cost, and there was the lack of the equipment that was holding them back.
Yes, yeah. And then there was a lot of psychological stuff, a lot of the sort of belief, that lack of self-belief, I think. I think a lot of people have tried a lot of things and they've failed. And I think there's a very strong, and it's perfectly understandable, sense of self-preservation. Why on earth would you commit yourself to doing something you're likely to fail at? Because you're only going to feel more shit about yourself, frankly.
Yeah, I guess depression kind of weaves into this as well.
Yeah. And of course that is linked to your diet. So you're eating a crap diet, you're more likely to be depressed. You continue eating a crap diet. It's like some awful vicious circle, isn't it?
Yeah, because you don't want to do anything when you're depressed and you feel you can't, and you have no motivation at all. And it's up to you. I want to just mention your website address again, because I know people are going to be very interested in your not-for-profit. It's www.bagsoftaste.org.
But I don't know where I was now.
We were talking about depression and how
Oh, yes. If you look at the origins, essentially we're a health inequalities organisation, because I was worried about the NHS. I was like, this is ridiculous. The NHS is going to collapse. How are we going to afford pay for this enormous cost to the NHS as a nation? Bearing in mind that coming from a sort of a finance background. And so that was where it all started. It was really about, we need to improve the health of people in poverty. And when I looked into it, I just found so much more information. And bear in mind, as I say, that my original background is medical sciences. So I mean, there's so much compelling health reasons why we really need to look at this area, why this becomes like, I was working on other stuff, but why this became to me as a really valuable place to spend my time, essentially, which is that 89% of all UK deaths are mostly diet related. They're non-communicable diseases, and most of those are diet related. So you've got obesity, which is obviously diet related. You've got diabetes, cardiovascular disease, you've got osteoporosis and dental diseases. And then you've got cancer, which is really interesting because obesity is actually the single largest cause of cancer. It's bigger than smoke. And that's not terribly well known. But yes, so these are all diet related diseases, and they're killing almost 90% of UK people, basically. So if this isn't a good place to spend your time, I don't know what is really. And what happened when I started was I looked for a link between diets and mental health. And this was in about 2014, I think I started this. And there just wasn't one. And now there is. So they've actually proven some very clear things between diet and mental health. And there's also increasingly an increased link between ultra processed foods and health as well. So if you eat a lot of ultra processed foods, you have a 29% increased risk of cardiovascular disease and a 20% increased risk of depression. So these things have all kind of come out. I sort of suspected at the time, and I looked for them, but I did not find them at the time. But that research is now coming out from the nutrition community. And if you look at health inequalities are when people experience a different health outcome to another group. And so we're looking at health inequalities of people in poverty. 25% of the observed inequalities in UK mortality are because of inequalities in diet. So it's a really big chunk of why poorer people die younger. And they do die a lot younger than richer people.
Now, obviously, you spent a lot of time researching people, developing different ways of doing things, honing in on what is it that was holding these people back from making those dietary changes. And you really uncovered so much. Now, I've heard that changing somebody's diet is sometimes almost like changing someone's religion. It's practically impossible. Have you now, with the changes you've made and the understanding of what was driving that resistance to change, have you managed to see a long-lasting change in the people you're working with?
Yes. I mean, when we started doing what we do now, and I can explain more about that later, in the pandemic. So we stopped the face-to-face classes for obvious reasons. And I had already for about 2 or 3 years been looking at ways of how we could teach people that we couldn't reach face to face, because I had regular messages, emails coming from people who said, I'm nowhere near one of your classes, but I really need your help. Can you help me? And I had tried lots of different ways to help these people. And to be honest, most of them didn't work. But I had hit on one that did work, which is almost exactly what we do now in the end. So when the pandemic hit, I thought, well, that course that I ran for the few people that actually got them to change what they were eating, we could do that instead. And so we started doing that. And I suppose we started doing it in about May. We got into lockdown in March, didn't we? So about May, I started getting some of my colleagues doing it. And by July, I think the course was quite stable. We knew what it was. We knew things haven't changed that much since then of 2020. So in January of 2021, 6 months after those people in July had done the course, I asked a group of graduate nutritionists and medical students to do an evaluation. It was completely independent. They did what they wanted to do. But I said, here's a bunch of people that did the course in July of 2020. It's 6 months later, call them up, ask them what's going on. And they did a thematic evaluation and we saw some really dramatic changes. But the one that really struck me was that, and it seemed like the worst time to do an evaluation because I thought you're asking people if they're eating less takeaways at a time when, there's queues outside supermarkets to go in. You're only allowed to go out once a week to go shopping. Do you remember what it was like? I mean,
yeah, I do.
Everyone was eating Uber Eats and Just Eat, right? I mean, it was insane. And I thought, this is the stupidest time, but I need to know if this works. And UK government statistics tell us that across the country, people were eating twice as many takeaways as they were pre-pandemic. That's UK government statistics. Our participants were eating 38% less takeaways than they were previously.
Fantastic.
Does it work? It really does work, yes. And one of our strap lines is cook better than the takeaway. I mean, ultimately, we give people a real genuine choice. It's not like eat something else that's healthier but doesn't taste that good. You will cook better than the takeaway. You would rather eat your cooking than eat the takeaway cooking. And that's really the thing. I mean, if you want to know what changes diet, I mean, we're a fairly hedonistic culture and everybody wants to wear hair shirts, right? I mean, you need to give people options that taste better.
Yes, definitely. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to continue with it. They'll be able to eat it once and that's it. Now, we're going to be talking a lot more about changing diets and changing lives with Bags of Taste founder Alicia Weston in a minute after a few messages from our commercial partners.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
You're listening to Dora Walsh on my weekly show on UK Health Radio, Nutrition for Health, Perfect Weight and Wellbeing. I'm talking to Alicia Weston. She's founder of the not-for-profit organization Bags of Taste. And we're talking about changing diets, changing lives. Now, Alicia, you're talking to me about all the things you did to understand what was holding people back from having a healthy diet and really sticking to it. People in poverty who are often not understanding how to incorporate this healthy diet into their life, and also held back by the perception that eating healthily is expensive, or worrying that their kids wouldn't like it, or that it would be too expensive in terms of the energy consumption. And you've done all of these kinds of research and courses to help people to know how to do this and incorporate this in their life. And now you're finding that the people are successfully doing it, reducing their takeaway consumption, having a healthier diet. Can you tell me what that healthier diet looks like? Give me an example of the kind of things that they are cooking and eating, which don't cost the earth, which don't use up too much energy, which, where the ingredients aren't too expensive and aren't going to be sitting in their cupboard, and which and also the family are going to enjoy and aren't going to be turned off by.
Well, we jokingly refer to ourselves sometimes as the unofficial chickpea marketing board. And I mean, they're fantastically healthy. And so many people, I can't tell you how many bits of feedback I've seen where people go, I had no idea that I love chickpeas. Some people actually don't even know that hummus is made from chickpeas, but they're happy to eat hummus, but they didn't even realize that it was made from chickpeas. So it's interesting. I mean, the main thing is that we try and cut out a lot of the ultra processed stuff. So, getting rid of jar sauce is one of the banes of my life. And so many people say, I won't eat that jar sauce anymore. It tastes terrible compared to this. So jar sauce is a really bad one. Takeaways. So giving people good alternatives to the curry house, basically. to Indian takeaways. Yeah, I mean, you were asking how do we change people's diets? And it's very complex because I've given you a sort of taste of all of the different reasons why people in poverty don't cook. And I think we have to start from the basis that their diet is absolutely, measurably, demonstrably much worse than the rest of the population. So somebody in the bottom 10% of society eats 7 times more takeaways than somebody in the top 10% of society. And again, this is government statistics. So it's demonstrably worse. And so this is why we work in this area and not just just across the population, because we can make a really big difference. So reducing the amount of ready meals, ultra processed food, takeaways for people in this cohort really, really does make a massive difference. But dietary change is hard to affect. Ask anybody that's been on a diet. And what really interests me is that people would often say, oh, well, they just need to eat better. They just need to eat different stuff. I can't tell you the number of people that told me things like that, but there's two general reasons why people think this is not happening. And either people think they're just lazy and they're not motivated to do it. And they should just pull up their socks and get on with it, or that they just need to learn. And if they only knew that they should be eating 5 a day, they would just magically eat 5 a day. Neither of those things is true at all. I mean, first of all, I mean, I think motivation is a really, really interesting one, because as I say, anybody that's intended to diet and has failed knows how difficult it is. I do not understand how they can just turn around to someone else and go, but you should be able to do it. You should be able to change your diet. I couldn't change mine, but you should be able to change yours. And everybody knows we should be eating 5 a day. And how many people actually are? It's not about knowledge. It's about behavior change. And that's really what it comes down to. So you cannot affect, if you look at behavior change and how to affect behavior change, you cannot affect behavior change unless you have a deep understanding of the issues. Because when I thought a lot about this, I thought a lot about motivation and why people do and don't do things. And I think there's motivation equals enthusiasm minus barriers. I think that's the equation I have. So basically it's how much do you want to do it? If you want to do it loads and you've got quite a lot of barriers, you're still going to manage it somehow. But if you would quite like to do it and you've got a load of barriers, you're probably not going to get to it. So we've got to accept that people in poverty have a lot more barriers than everybody else. So you can do one of two things. In reality, you do both at the same time. You can either massively increase the enthusiasm to do it and keep the same number of barriers. And that happens. So for instance, when people get really sick or they're about to have a baby, I mean, these are well known as like lifestyle choice times where you can actually affect change in their behavior. If you go to a newly pregnant mum and say, you need to really improve your diet or your baby's going to potentially be sick. Yeah, she's going to do it probably, right? These are known times where you can intervene. So because the enthusiasm increases massively, the barriers remain the same, but the enthusiasm increases massively. Another way you can increase enthusiasm is just to inspire people and just go, what? There's this amazing dish from Timbuktu. You've got to try it. And people are like, Timbuktu is a real thing. Is that a real place? Where is it? And they're excited and they're enthused and they're inspired. And so I think inspiration is a big part of what we do. And then also the removal of barriers. And that is really, that's why the bags work so well. That when we give people the ingredients, it removes a massive barrier that right now we actually give it to them free. We used to sell it to them, which was a very good gauge of whether or not people value it. But now we know what we need to do and what we don't need to do. We don't need that quite so much. So we give it to them free. And that removes the barrier of cost, right? All of that, the barrier of having to buy a whole bottle of soy sauce if you're only going to use 2 teaspoons. All of those costs are now your risk of waste. It's no longer a risk because you're not even paying for it. So all of those barriers you can remove. And I think for any behavior change, you just have to make it easy. You just have to think of all the reasons why. And so I was talking to someone the other day, we were talking about the consistency of what goes in the bags and how important it is. Everything is there. And I said, because if somebody doesn't have garlic and they're missing 2 garlic cloves, that's it. The whole thing stops and they will fail.
Yeah, because supermarket or they don't have the money or they don't want to buy a whole, these days, sell individual garlics too much anymore. They sell it in a pack.
Yeah, but it's like, no, they'll forget when they're down. But there's so many reasons. And when you're trying to get somebody to change something that they've been doing consistently for ages, plus somebody with low confidence, low motivation, low self-motivation, any bump in that road can potentially stop them.
Yeah.
Now, some will be more motivated than others. Some will overcome 5 bumps, but on 6 they'll stop, right? Some people won't even overcome 1. You're missing 2 garlic cloves, and that's it. End of story for them. So it really depends on, I mean, obviously every individual is different. I hate to generalize, but we have worked with a lot of people. So we do have the data behind it.
Not to be devil's advocate, but with people say you're spoon feeding people versus teaching them to have that mental strength and resilience, to learn to push through barriers, because that's how one is successful in life and manages to make a change, is to push through things that are uncomfortable and difficult. And these are probably the people, because of psychological barriers, they haven't been able to do that. But maybe do they not need coaching on how to focus on their mindset in order to be able to deal with these uncomfortable situations?
No, honestly, I really disagree with that statement. I can see why people would say that. If we're telling someone just toughen up, I mean, many of the people we work with have failed at a lot of things in their lives, and it's not their fault. They've been dealt a really crap hand, and things have not gone well for them. And it's very easy for me. I can just go, something bad happens to me, and I just go, you know what? If I just keep doing this, I'll sort it out. Every day I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do this thing. And when I got painful shoulder recently, I had to do physio, and every day at 6 o'clock in the evening, I did my exercises. But it's really hard with people that have they're struggling with their mental health. They've failed at a lot of things. I think, why should I bother to do that? Because it's probably not going to work out. I think what you need to do in this situation is not tell them to toughen up and get on with it and just keep going, because that hasn't worked out for them. It's actually to give them the confidence that something that they do has worked.
It's almost like parenting, because maybe they haven't had that education and care when they were children. Maybe these people have grown up in a broken home. They might have been abused mentally or physically. And that really breaks down somebody's confidence in their ability to achieve things, and an emotional support. So it sounds like it's a very caring, mothering exercise.
It is very, very caring. Yeah. And I think that's one of the absolute critical things. I mean, when I list out all of those lists of things I talked about, I mean, the psychological stuff is probably about 40% of 40% of it's economic, 40% is psychological, 10% is structural stuff, and 10% is what you can learn. So the psychological support is massive. And actually one of my area heads said to me recently, we were talking about the phenomenal results that we get, because we just get these amazing stories from people just non-stop. And I said, it has never ceased to amaze me. From the very first pilot course that I did for this, it has never ceased to amaze me. When we talk about changing diets, changing lives, I mean, the life changes that getting people to cook has caused, and literally staggered. And I remain staggered all the way through. And we were talking about this, and she said, I don't think you can underestimate just how some of the people that we work with have never had anybody that's cared about them as an individual ever. And that is a really sad thing to say, but I think she's right. I think it's true.
Yeah.
So the fact that we take the time and doing this sort of virtually as we do now, and perhaps we should explain to people what it is we actually do as well at some point.
Yeah.
In doing this virtually as we do now, I actually naively thought that it would cost a lot less than with our face-to-face classes. But in fact, it costs about the same. And I was thinking about that when I was doing budgets sometime afterwards. And I said, why does it cost so much? And then I realized it's because we're dealing with exactly the same people, and they require the same amount of care and attention as they've ever done. And that costs money. That costs time. So yeah, it is about time and attention and care, and someone really, really cheering you on.
Yeah, encouragement, because we all need encouragement, and even as adults. And obviously they haven't had that in life by the sounds of it. So it's really building that up in them to give them that confidence that they can do it for themselves. Now, we're going to be talking a lot more about changing diets and changing lives after a few messages from our commercial partners.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
You're listening to Dora Walsh on my weekly show, Nutrition for Health, Perfect Weight and Wellbeing on UK Health Radio, your global feel-good radio. I'm talking with Alicia Weston. She's the founder of not-for-profit chain Bags of Taste, and you can find out more about them on their website, bagsoftaste.org. We're talking about changing diets, changing lives. Now, Alicia, we were talking about the psychological aspects and how this forms a major part of what you do in terms of helping those people to change their behaviors, because as we said, behavioral change is very difficult. Like trying to change somebody's religion, very practically impossible, but you're getting absolutely amazing results. What do you think you do? Is it that you do that is different from other organizations? If we haven't already covered that enough.
Well, perhaps we should explain what we actually do just to start with. Yeah. But when I'm asked to explain this to people, I usually say that we're like HelloFresh with added motivation. And so essentially what we do is we'll deliver participants a bag of ingredients and course materials. And that includes some equipment like knife sharpeners to actually pursue the course. And then we also provide all the motivation as well. So yeah, I think most people understand that. And it's very interesting because if I was to say that to a potential student, the chances are they wouldn't know who HelloFresh is. There are other recipe box kits available, of course. It just shows, I find it very interesting that the targeted marketing for people like HelloFresh and Gusto and these people, that they simply don't reach our cohorts. Our cohorts, the only people that find it economic to market to them are basically scammers and gambling sites. That's all the advertising they see. So what we actually do, the really important thing for us to start with is to find the right people, because you can find a million middle class people who fancy a free HelloFresh. I mean, that's not difficult, but we are obviously looking for people in that sort of bottom 5% really of society that we can really make a massive difference with, and that it makes it worthwhile for us to spend this money. So we spend quite a lot of time working with partners, working with other charities to actually find the right students to put on the course. And then we provide those students, once we've got them, we provide them with a mentor. And that there's always a staff member, but there's also a mentor as well. And the mentor is a person that takes their really personal interest. So if anybody is interested in mentoring with us, and do get in touch, there's details on our website. But basically, these are individuals. About half of our mentors are nutritionists, in fact, and but we also have food teachers and just ordinary people that just want to help. Really, the commitment is a couple of hours a week for 2 weeks, and then you get a new student because the course lasts a couple of weeks. And that mentor is basically responsible for encouraging that person and supporting that person through the course, essentially. And the course is actually run either on WhatsApp or over the phone. So 95% of the people we work with do it on WhatsApp, and about 5% need phone mentoring. And that's a little bit more involved and a bit more specialist. But most of our mentors we would work with on WhatsApp. And as I say, that mentor kind of makes friends with the person. They usually take a small group of three students, and they will keep track of them. They will see where they are. They will encourage them. They will ask them why they've stopped. Have they managed to do it? Help them goal set, those sort of things, and really take a personal interest in how they're doing and make sure that they get through that course. So it is exactly like, it's like parenting. For about 2 weeks, you're kind of their parent. You're their mother or their father, gentle nagging, support. How are you getting on? When are you planning on doing it? And you find out a bit about their lives. And at the end of it, when they cook the 3 recipes, usually the feedback you get from the students, the mentors love getting the feedback from the students, because they tell them these phenomenal sort of impacts they've had on their life. And it's just lovely. It's lovely. And it's a tremendously rewarding thing to do. So yeah, what do we do differently? We provide mentors. I think that's one thing. I don't think there are very many, I think there's hardly any organizations that do anything like what we do, to be honest. I think we're fairly unique in the way that we do it, being on WhatsApp and all the rest of it. But yes, I mean, so the whole thing is fairly unique, but at the same time, I think that the mentors are a very key part of what we do. And we encourage students to go through the course, to do all the stages, and then they graduate. We have about almost 80% graduation rate, which, given the cohorts we're working with, and we're talking about ex-offenders, people in hostels, people who are struggling with addiction. It's a wide range of people, single parent families, people in insecure accommodation, people who are on a lot of people with some kind of mental health condition or depression or anxiety. Bear in mind that what we do happens at home. And that's really key. And I do think behavior change happens in the home. I think expecting people to go on a course and then go home and do things differently is somewhat naive, to be honest. If you don't change what you do at home, you haven't changed. So, but for a lot of the people that we work with, we're one of the few services that reach them. Because if you've got anxiety, you won't leave the house. What have you got? You've got social workers that might come to you. The NHS might come to you if you've got like major health issues. You've got telephone befriending services. There isn't a lot that comes into your home and that can really help you. So a lot of people that are on our courses also, they would struggle with attending something face to face. And that was something that really struck me when we used to do face to face classes, was that more than half the people we signed up never showed up. And I used to think, what is going on with those people? Why are they not coming? And it turns out it's anxiety, it's caring responsibilities. It's that inability to sort of just have a chaotic lifestyle, so they don't necessarily keep a diary, they don't remember to show up, or all manner of things, lots of reasons. And it's fantastic that what we do actually goes into their home. They don't have to show up anywhere. They can't escape from us. We rock up at the door with a gift. So it's great. It's really reaching the people that I wanted to reach, which are really the most vulnerable people.
It sounds like you really are, your strapline, changing diets, changing lives, is what it does it does what it says on the tin. And it's an amazing story. I hope our listeners have really benefited from it. I know for themselves, we all need to change our diet. We all need to change our life. But obviously the work you're doing is very deep, and you're changing people that wouldn't have access to healthy eating if you hadn't have shown them how to do it. And we know that it's going to change the trajectory of their lives. Are you looking to recruit more volunteers, mentors and funders, commissioners, donations and potential partners, Alicia?
Yes. I mean, we're certainly open to speaking to any local organisation that feels that they're in touch with a lot of the kind of people that would benefit from our course. We do currently work with several of them across the country, and we can provide the back end, as it were. We can provide the courses if they have the students and are able to pack up the bags and get the students the ingredients locally. Then we're really willing to talk to them, and we could look at potentially raising funding. If there's anybody that's interested in funding what we do, of course, I'm happy to talk to them. Also commissioners. About half of our projects are at least partially or fully funded by public health or the NHS in the areas that we work in. And if you don't feel that you can do any of these things, but you could send us a donation, please. Our website is www.bagsoftaste.org. We're willing to take anything.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's a very cause. I think you sound so passionate about it, and you are, because it works. You're seeing the results. It's making a difference. Obviously, it's great for the people individually, but for our society as a whole, you're taking the pressure off the NHS, because as you said, most of these chronic diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, are all diet related. So it's so important that we do this at a grassroots level.
I feel that a lot of people they do really care about food poverty. I think people are often quite mystified. I mean, people have said to me, I remember talking to a policeman once, and he said, you work in food poverty. He said, can I ask you? He said, I take stuff down to the food bank, and I don't feel that's really the solution to the problem. I feel it's just a bit of a sticking plaster on the problem. What can I do that will make a difference? Well, Bags of Taste is the answer to that, really. I mean, if you really want to make a difference, volunteer with us, donate us money, because the people that we work with do not need to go to food banks anymore. The lessons the recipes that they learn on the course it costs less than £1 a portion. People can afford to feed themselves. And after having done our course, it's just a 2-week intervention, and it really dramatically changes their level of independence.
Yeah, I think this is what people need to know, because I've heard so many times people saying, too expensive to eat healthy. It's too expensive. I can't do it. You even hear it from people that are not in poverty. They seem to think it's expensive. But really, if you want to buy, if you want to eat, then it isn't. And you can make this healthy eating on a budget a reality in your life. So it's so important that you're getting the message out there. It's wonderful that you've been on the show today. I do really appreciate you sharing this amazing story. I'm sure our listeners are very interested in what you're doing. And I do encourage anybody that is interested in supporting your company, Bags of Taste, your not-for-profit, to go to the website bagsoftaste.org, where you can make a donation and find out more and reach you. Thank you so much.